So wireless encryption, threats, and security model. When I'm talking about wireless encryption, I mean WEP, WPA, and WPA2. These are the technologies that attempt to secure your Wi-Fi communications between your device, whether it be a laptop or a smartphone, and an access point. So what I'm trying to answer here is not how does it work, not how do I use it, but what kind of security does it provide. So say I'm at home, at a coffee shop, at my local hackerspace, I'm browsing, I'm maybe doing some sensitive stuff. Who can see what? What am I protected from? I want to talk real quickly here about link encryption versus end-to-end encryption. Most of what we've talked about today is end-to-end encryption, where a message is encrypted by the sender and not decrypted until it reaches the recipient. That's not what wireless security is. It's link encryption, where it's encrypted over just one length of the path between the sender and the recipient. So disadvantages of that are that it only protects you from an attacker who has access to only that link. We're not talking about the coffee shop owner can still see what you're doing, their ISP, and your government. But if somebody is sitting next to you at the coffee shop trying to figure out what they're doing, maybe it will protect you from that. On the plus side, there's much less room for user error. Link encryption is almost never optional, and there usually isn't the same sort of public key issues with just clicking through certificate warnings that you have with SSH. So why wireless encryption in the first place? This is, it may or may not be obvious, but it travels over the air and can be read by anyone in range. And most of our traffic, we don't want that to be the case. We would rather a little bit more confidentiality so that other users can't see it. And we also may want access control for the network. If I'm a large institution, I only want trusted members of the institution to be able to use the internet so they're not leeching off of free internet or have access to things inside my secure network. These are very different purposes. They're sort of all rolled into one with the wireless encryption technologies. There really isn't anything to provide confidentiality without requiring an authentication token from the user. But authentication does rely on confidentiality because otherwise you could just pretend to be something else since you can read everything that they're doing. So there's sort of 5 types of people we want to think about as far as attackers. Attackers could be authenticated or unauthenticated. This is whether they have the WPA key or the WEP key or like a username and password if it's one of the more exotic authentication models. And we're also talking about whether the attacker is passive or active. So can they just read everything that happens? Do they just listen on the channel? Or can they actually inject information? So if you're talking about a coffee shop or a hackerspace, everybody knows the password because it's on the wall or it's on the receipt or the person who's drinking coffee next to you will just tell you. And then these are assets, things that an attacker might want to know that we might not want them to know. So access credentials, if this is your home connection or your work connection, you don't want anybody who drives by to be able to connect and use your internet. The full plain text, this is sort of what the content of the message is. IP addresses are domain names. Do I want people to see what websites I'm going to or who I'm communicating with? And then the last one is a little bit more subtle. It's device or user identifying information. This is somebody who's listening on the Wi-Fi channel. Will they be able to know that I was here? Will they be able to link my presence here to my presence at another coffee shop or at the same coffee shop in 2 weeks? So in the beginning, we had WEP. This was in 1999, and at the time, Strong cryptography was still under export restrictions in the United States, so there were a variety of security problems with this. It only had a 40-bit key, which is really not sufficient ever. And there were also some even cryptanalytic issues. So, well, the biggest structural issue is that the actual encryption key is the authentication token. So if you're at a coffee shop, everybody has that who can access the network. Then they can read all the messages because that's what the messages are actually encrypted with. So I have aircrackng.org here. This is a really fun attack. You should go home and try it. This security can be cracked in about an hour for a passive attacker and minutes to seconds for an active attack. So it's really as good as open. WPA, it was an effort to correct some of the issues here. It has the same pre-shared key authentication. However, that key is not used to directly encrypt the messages. For each session, a pairwise master key is generated, and then there's a per packet key as well. So it does have a much better confidentiality guarantee against users who are authenticated. However, there's a Honeypot AP attack. Because the user only authenticates to the access point doesn't authenticate itself to the user. So it's really quite easy to do a man-in-the-middle attack, or for an attacker to create an access point that mimics the legit one and then passes the traffic through to the internet via the cellular network or anything really. So here, this is an active attacker. Can take your confidentiality or potentially do man-in-the-middle attacks against your end-to-end encryption technologies, stuff like SSL strip. WPA2 is an improvement on WPA. It changes a couple of the encryption details, but the biggest thing is offering WPA2 Enterprise. So these are different authentication technologies than the simple pre-shared key that really are only used by large organizations, since they require you to set up an 802.11x server, so like a radius server. There's a variety of different modes. The one thing that they mostly have in common is access point authentication. So not only do I have to present a username and password in order to connect to this network, but the network has to present a certificate so that I know that I'm connecting to the right thing and not some sort of man in the middle. Unfortunately, however, because of the reality of the way most Wi-Fi connected devices work, we have the Jasager attack, which is German for yes sayer. And really what happens is when your device wants to connect to a network, it looks and sees what's available. The way that it does that is it hops on each channel for a few milliseconds and sends out a probe request, where it asks for all of the networks that it knows how to connect to. So this could be your home, your work, your school, all of these networks. And all the attacker has to do is say, yeah, okay, I'm that network. Go ahead and connect to me. Your phone or your computer will do it, and now all of your traffic is going through there. And then this is a very simple attack to do again. Hack5 has a cool product called Pineapple. It's about $100. It's a little box that does this thing automatically, and it has SSL strip and some other cool stuff built in. So beyond that, we have device identification. So every Wi-Fi device has a unique or mostly unique MAC address that it uses to negotiate who can control the channel for what periods of times. There's really not anything you can do to get around that as far as your device being identified as having been on the network. You can try to spoof it. I mean, for those of you who don't understand what that is, that's basically the very simple level of impersonation. So this would be analogous to checking into a hotel with a pseudonym. But for MAC addresses, part of the MAC address is a manufacturer prefix. So all of the Cisco devices have MAC addresses that start in, these 4 or 5 hex characters. And a sophisticated attacker can very easily tell what is a real and not real MAC address. And even if you try to copy somebody who's around you, it's not hard to differentiate those based on their traffic behavior. And then there's other kinds of fingerprinting with these probe requests based on what kind of signal strength and data rates that are supported. This is all spelled out in the probe requests. So even a passive attacker can find out all of this information. And it may not seem like a big deal, just my other networks, but it can be. This is where you work, if you connect to your work network, where you go to school, where you live, if you connect to your home network, who your friends are, if you go over to their houses and connect to their networks, what other places you go to, hotels, conferences, hackerspaces. And at Black Hat and DEF CON, Brendan O'Connor gave a talk on using information like this from a bunch of different locations over not very long periods of time to build complex profiles on tons and tons of people at once using only passive attacks. So this is what you want to keep in mind is the probe requests that your phone sends out, regardless of what it sees, will potentially reveal a lot of information about you. What can I do about it? Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot. Most devices, it's very difficult to configure them to not send out probe requests. They do this because it's a much faster way to scan. If you can hop on a channel and send out a probe request, you only really need to wait 20 to 40 milliseconds to get a response. Whereas if you were to passively scan for beacon frames and things like that, you could end up spending 100 or 200 milliseconds on each channel, and it quickly becomes 4 or 5, 6 seconds, and my phone wants the push request really fast. For device identification, there's not much you can do. As far as protecting the plain text of your messages, however, you can use end-to-end encryption, have good HTTPS habits, don't click through certificate warnings, use HTTPS Everywhere or a browser extension like that. The best thing to do is use a VPN. Then not only are your message contents protected, but also the recipients. So the person next to me at the coffee shop can't tell what I'm doing or who I'm talking to. However, on a lot of cell phones, it's very difficult to configure it so that it won't use network at all if it can't do it through the VPN. And that just comes down to device manufacturers. That's really it. This isn't a scary talk. I just want you to be conscious of what you're doing when you connect to Wi-Fi, and if you're going at a place where you don't want a digital record of your presence, you should turn off Wi-Fi. You should have your phone forget networks that you normally connect to, and just in general be conscious of what your phone is leaking. And I think we're under time, so I can take a couple of questions.
Use a VPN isn't a device. It's not a typo.
Yeah, that's not a typo. You just really use a VPN if you're worried.
So where do you go to find out how to do that?
Basically, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. The idea is that I have some sort of secure tunnel that I route all of my internet traffic to. So this could be some server out on the internet somewhere in a jurisdiction that has laws favorable to you, or whatever the case. Different VPN providers may require you to use particular software. There's a couple of different protocols out there for it. I really can't answer that question because I don't know your situation, but I would Let's see, where can you go to find a list of good VPN providers?
I know a good provider out of Langley, Virginia.
So I remember Torrent Freak had an article where they wrote up sort of the logging practices of various VPN providers. So I would check that out.
You could also run your own VPN through your home network.
You can through your home network or through VPS that you have somewhere, like Amazon. But usually it's cheaper to just pay some provider $5 a month for all you could ever use. Other questions? All right, thanks.